Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to talk about an experience that I had on Sunday. Sunday was the day, July 14th, that President Trump had pre-announced that massive deportation and immigration raids were about to begin. Looks like those raids maybe didn't start on Sunday, but the communities of immigrants in Virginia and elsewhere who've been experiencing tremendous fear had that fear dramatically accelerated by the announcement. On Sunday, my wife and I we live in Richmond, and we went down to a town called Kilmarnock, about an hour and 10 minutes away from us, where my wife's parents are in a nursing home. They're 95 and 93 years old. And we went down to spend the day with my in-laws and to take my mother-in-law to church at the local Episcopal church where she has long been a member. I was struck by the readings. I was struck by, it was a day of fear for many immigrant communities, and the readings that occurred in the Episcopal church, which are readings that are delivered in Catholic and Presbyterian and other churches on a set schedule, struck me as I was thinking about the fear in these communities. The Old Testament reading. The Old Testament reading normally in most churches around the globe, Catholic and Episcopal, is reading from Deuteronomy, but for some reason the pastor of this church, it was his goodbye ceremony. He was leaving after serving for an interim, and he had switched the Old Testament reading and instead put in a reading from the Old Testament, the book of Amos. Amos chapter 7, verses 7 through 9. This is what he showed me. The Lord was standing by a wall that had been built true to plumb, with a plumb line in his hand. And the Lord asked me, "What do you see, Amos?" "A plumb line," I replied. Then the Lord said, "Look, I am setting a plumb line among my people, Israel. I will spare them no longer." A plumb line is a device used when you're constructing something. It's just a weight on a string, non-magnetized, and it will show up and down so that you can build something that is square, that has a solid foundation. It's a reading about principles and values and what is a solid foundation. The gospel reading that we heard in our church, in tiny church in Kilmarnock around the world, was the Good Samaritan story. Jesus is being pestered by a lawyer about what do I do to inherit eternal life, and Jesus says, "You know the answer. Tell me the answer." And the lawyer does. He's smart. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says, "Fine, you know the answer, just live that way." But the lawyer, either to trap Jesus or because he was confused or he was trying to figure something out, says, "But who is my neighbor?" And then Jesus tells the story of a person beaten on the road to Jericho, lying at the side of the road. Some pass by, pretending not to notice, though they do notice. Some notice and sort of half go over to help but don't do anything. But one person, a Samaritan, and in the Bible, Samaritans were despised minorities because they didn't worship like other people did. The Samaritan actually is the one that goes and helps. And as everyone knows the story, takes care of the person who's beaten, takes him to an inn, pays the innkeeper and says, "And I'll even pay you more, I'll settle up, make sure that you nurse him back to health." This Samaritan was the one who was the neighbor. And when Jesus then goes back to the lawyer and say, "Which was the one who was the neighbor to the person who was beaten?" The lawyer is so infected by the prejudice of his day, he can't even say the Samaritan. Because, again, Samaritans were despised people, much like refugees or migrants or migrant kids seem today to be despised people. The lawyer couldn't even make his lips say the word, the Samaritan. Who is the neighbor to the person who was beaten? He can't even answer the question of the Samaritan, but he does know the answer. And instead he says, "The one who showed him mercy." The one who showed him mercy. Those were the readings that we heard, that the Lord will set a plumb line to try to determine whether the nation, in that instance Israel, was behaving properly or not. And in terms of what the plumb line is, what is the moral standard, the Lord is encouraging us to be neighbors, and not just to the people like us, not just to the people who are our next door neighbors, but even to people who are down on their luck, beaten, despised, hurting. Sunday was also another day that it was Woody Guthrie's birthday. Woody Guthrie, great American songwriter, known for This Land Is Your Land, so many other songs that are part of who we are as a people. Woody Guthrie wrote a song in 1948 called Plane Wreck at Los Gatos, and the song is more commonly known by the name Deportee. We've lived this history before. In 1948 in California, there was an effort to deport so many people. There are times when we desperately want immigrants here to do the work, and then there's phases where they get deported. And Woody Guthrie was listening to the radio, and this is a man born on July 14, the day that the president announced the deportation raids would start. Woody Guthrie was listening to a radio in 1948, January of 1948, and he heard a story about a plane that was taking deportees back to Mexico, and the plane crashed in Los Gatos Canyon near LA. And the pilot and some others were killed, and 32 deportees were killed. Woody Guthrie was struck that when the story was told on the radio, they mentioned the names of the pilot and the co-pilot and the others who were working on the plane, but the 32 deportees who were killed, their names weren't mentioned. They were, quote, just deportees. Here are the lyrics to the song, the Woody Guthrie song, written based on an incident in January 1948, but our history repeats itself. The crops are all in and the peaches are rotting, the oranges piled in their creosote dumps. They're flying them back to the Mexican border to pay all their money to wade back again. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye Rosalita, adios mis amigos Jesus y Maria. You won't have your names when you ride the big airplane. All they will call you will be deportees. My father's own father, he waded that river. They took all the money he made in his life. My brothers and sisters come working the fruit trees, and they rode the truck till they took down and died. Some of us are illegal, and some are not wanted. Our work contract's out, and we have to move on. 600 miles to the Mexican border, they chase us like outlaws, like rustlers, like thieves. We died in your hills, we died in your deserts, we died in your valleys, and died on your plains. We died neath your trees, and we died in your bushes, both sides of the river. We died just the same. The sky plane caught fire over Los Gatos Canyon, a fireball of lightning, and shook all our hills. Who are all these friends, all scattered like dry leaves? The radio says they are just deportees. Is this the best way we can grow our big orchards? Is this the best way we can grow our good fruit? To fall like dry leaves, to rot on the topsoil, and be called by no name except deportees. Along with several other colleagues, earlier this week I filed a bill called the Stop Cruelty to Migrant Children Act. It is a bill that has 40-plus co-sponsors. It would do a number of things. It would set safety and health and nutrition standards in these facilities whose pictures we are seeing, pictures that set an embarrassing example of a nation that should want to set a good example. So it would set minimum standards for food and nutrition and health care. It would guarantee that children in these facilities would receive 3 meals a day and that the meals would be of adequate nutritional value. It would end the practice of family separation unless ordered by a court, so the presumption would be families could not be separated. It would provide additional resources for lawyers so that people can follow the rule of law and present evidence and present a case for asylum or refugee status if there is a case to be presented. It would allow the restart of programs like the Family Case Management Program, which was a successful program that enabled people to be placed in community settings, not cages or jails or institutions and have management to make sure that they then come to court dates on time. The bill has a number of provisions that I think are worthy, but the thing that's the most important about the bill to me and why I agreed to co-sponsor it is I just think it puts our country in a position where we're setting the right example, not the wrong example. It puts our country in a position where if the plumb line of right and wrong is applied to us, we're on the right side of that judgment. It puts us in a position where, as we are being directed to be good neighbors, including to people who are hurting, including to people who are suffering, we would be able to look ourselves in the mirror and look the world in the eye and say the United States believes that we are good neighbors and we are behaving in a neighborly way toward people. These issues are of massive importance to the individuals involved. There was a story earlier this week about a border agent requiring a young girl, you're going to be separated, your parents are going to be separated, and you have to decide whether you go with your mother or your father. Why make a child of tender years make that choice? The young girl's name was Sophie. Many of us know the Virginia author William Styron's book, Sophie's Choice. Sophie forced to make an existential choice between her children in a concentration camp in Poland during World War II. That's the choice, that's the existential choice in the heart of that novel. When tiny Sophia is being told, we are separating your mother and father and you have to choose between them, should a child have to do that? None of us would tolerate that for our own family members. None of us would tolerate that for a member of our community. So is it fair to do that to a child of tender years because she happens to be somebody who's come from Central America? These issues are of immense importance to the individuals involved, to the Sophies, to the father and daughter who tried to get across a river a few weeks ago and drowned as they were trying to do it. They had come thousands of miles and they were so close. All they wanted to do was apply for asylum legally. Can you accept my application? We're not trying to sneak across. We want to apply legally and then have the laws of your country apply to us. If we can justify that we should come in, please do that. But when they reach the border, we are taking so few applications now that they waited and they waited and they waited and they eventually tried to cross a river and were drowned in the process. And that heartbreaking picture of them having come so far, being so close that they could touch the bank. They almost got to touch the bank of this nation that they had dreamed might offer them a better life. Their case, had they been able to apply, may or may not have been accepted. I mean, there's no guarantee that they would have met the standards, but all they wanted was the opportunity to apply to enter this greatest nation on earth. So, Mr. President, I'll just conclude and say I hope in the days ahead, I know there's discussions going on between members of this body and between members of this body in the White House about what we might do. I just want us to do something that we can look in the mirror and be proud of. I want us to do something that we can put as an example for ourselves and for others. I want the plumb line that separates good and bad behavior and foundations that are morally strong versus those that are shaky and weak to judge us fairly. I want us to be neighborly. I want us to be neighborly in the best traditions of who we have always been. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and I note the absence of a quorum.